fathom how mass social revolutions ever happened at all. Imagine without a telephone. But yeah, we go back in history. These things did occur.
Things are changing, people are talking, and why? Because of the power of ideas. By connecting ideas together, creative leaps can be made, producing some of history's biggest breakthroughs. Ideas are like organisms, they replicate, they have infectivity and spreading powers. They leap from brain to brain, they compete for the limited resource of our attention. They are the new replicator, born from the primordial soup of human culture.
Repetitive and mundane jobs also happen to be the easiest jobs to technologically automate. And without money as an obstacle in a resource-based model, jobs people don't want to do will simply be automated, while jobs that involve human creativity will involve humans that get a reward from the work itself.
So behavior is viral, and values are viral. Apart from that, it's also important to realize that this train of thought is extremely self-evident. And the goal is not to convince anyone of these understandings, but to set up the conditions for them to realize it for themselves. We don't impose. If anything is really true, then we all should have the capacity to realize it on our own without feeling imposition.
I draw up a scenario like this. If I took this group of people in this room right now, and I put you on a deserted island with nothing but one coconut tree, how long do you think you reasonable people would last before it really hits the fan?
Whether it be the stress of losing one's job, lack of purchasing power, having to submit to employment, or having to suffer a hostile corporate takeover, there is a relationship between these stressors, your health, and the amount of inequality that exists around you.
In a 1992 Gallup poll, more than 50% of American adults, 94 million Americans, volunteered time for social causes at an average of 4.2 hours a week, for a total of 20.5 billion hours a year. And that study was done in an environment where people also have to work for money in order to live. So imagine what type of creative and innovative work you might be excited to contribute to if your needs were met at a high standard of living.
This is why we propose a resource-based economy. Money is not scientific, it's made up. It no longer works as a positive force in society, instead dividing, blocking and usurping human ingenuity that has been present since the absence of money as a motivational force. Tesla didn't do it for the money, Armstrong wasn't a radio genius since his teens because of the money, Galileo didn't do it for the money, Martin Luther King didn't do it for the money. If you're only doing it for the money, it's probably not worth doing to begin with.
It's always nice to applaud the person who actually made the video, even though they weren't up here on the stage, so thanks for that. Welcome to Z-Day, everyone. My name's James Phillips. I'm going to be your navigator for today. I think the fact that you're all here shows a good sign right from the outset. The fact that people say social change will never happen. By the very fact you're here means it already is. So there you go, 1-0 to us already. So what's the plan for today? Okay. Probably it would start off with this working. There we go. Okay. So first of all, we've got a great lineup of speakers for today. After just this brief introduction, we've got David Dann, who's the UK chapter coordinator of the movement, who's going to give a brief outline as to what it is we actually advocate. Then we're going to have Ben Dyson from Positive Money talking about the effects of fractional reserve banking on the economy and society in general, which is the money creation process we currently have in society. Martin Wilkinson from the Equality Trust is going to be talking about income inequality and the effects that has on human health and environmental conditions. David Wood is going to, from the London Futurists, is going to be talking about technological unemployment, a growing trend we're going to see as he will discuss. Dave Lucas, who's another member of the UK chapter here, is going to be discussing some of Jeremy Rifkin's work about the possible nodes of transition towards the economic model that the movement discusses in the third industrial revolution. And myself, I'm going to be talking about the model that we advocate, why the movement's still important, and why we indeed need to be here. So we've been more inclusive in the past towards third-party organizations, which we still want to do, and we still advocate and still support these third-party groups, but it has actually come at a cost to the movement. Our structure needs improvement. We need more members. We need more action. So really, today, what we're trying to do is hone in, focus back in on why the movement's important, why what we advocate is relevant still, and why we need your help. So the lineup of the day, more specifically, is as thus, and as you can already tell, we're running late. So that's a good start. From 3 p.m., you'll notice a bit of a shift in gears or thereabouts. We're going to have a bit more of a discussion-orientated day today. Usually, it's just us lecturing you all day. But obviously, any sort of transition to the sort of world we would hopefully all like to see is going to involve all of us. It has to be participatory. It can't be, it can't be just, well, we'll sit down and let you get on with it. We're going to have to work out how to do this together and work on our strengths to make sure that happens. And so a lot of magic tends to happen when people go away and discuss these sorts of things amongst themselves and comes out in Q&As, and there's some good sort of stuff that happens there. So we want to sort of do that, and it's not really listed on here, but I'd quite like it if we could reconvene about 4:30 or so, just before the close of the day, to sort of discuss some of those ideas that you've been discussing amongst yourselves. In between the speakers for today, we're going to have a brief Q&A just to fill up some dead stage time and obviously ask them questions that were relevant to their presentation. So please keep your questions short. I'm not saying your life story is not really, really interesting, and we want to hear it, which is why after the event today, we're all going to Wetherspoons, because life stories are just more interesting over a pint, I find. So, yeah, they'll still be drinking in our economy. Isn't that great? So it's only a 4 minutes walk from here. It's the Wetherspoons at Pendrell's Oak, so come and discuss things with us there. In the event of a fire, I recommend running away from it. Fires are dangerous, and they burn you. That's pretty much it. Oh, and please do turn off your phone. It is rather irritating. And that's pretty much it. So welcome to Z-Day, everyone. Our next speaker is Ben Dyson, co-author of Modernizing Money, Why Our Monetary System is Broken and How It Can Be Fixed. He argues that a design flaw in the banking system, which allows banks to effectively create more than 97% of the money that our economy runs on, is responsible for the financial crisis, unaffordable housing, and the government's reliance on unsustainable debt-fueled growth. The proposals were recently featured by the Financial Times. He's the founder of Positive Money, a campaign for a banking system that works for society and not against it. You can find out more information at positivemoney.org, but please welcome Ben Dyson.
Is this working? Morning. I think that's working, isn't it? Okay, so about 12 or 13 years ago, I decided to study economics. And the reason was, I figured, economics explains how the world works. So if I could understand economics, I could figure out, how to make the world a better place. And it only took about a year of studying economics to become quite disillusioned, to realize that economics has very little to teach you about the real world and how things actually happen in reality. And I'll give you a couple of examples of how far removed economics has come from how things really are in the real world. Economics basically gives everybody, they explain human beings as though they're completely rational, calculating individuals who weigh up the pros and cons of every single thing that you could do to figure out what's going to give you the most benefit. So it will tell you that if you walk into a supermarket, your brain starts weighing up all the different combinations of things that you could buy, everything that you could put in your basket. And through some rational calculation, you end up buying the basket of things that's going to give you the most happiness. Now, we all know that's not really the way things work. You go in there, you see the special offers, you buy some beers and some donuts, and then you get home and you realize you've forgotten the pasta that you needed to cook dinner. You know, we're not that rational. Economics actually says that there is a way of figuring out the formula for happiness, because we're all rational and we calculate things in this sort of mechanical, rational way. This is their formula for happiness. I can't explain it, but so studying this, has anybody here studied economics? Okay, yeah. Well, it doesn't take long before you start to think, well, this has got nothing to do with the real world. And I got frustrated with the course. I wasn't really learning anything that was useful. Did learn one thing that was useful, though, and it was, there's one thing that's left out of economics, and it's the study of money. And this might sound really odd, because you would think economics is all about money. But most of the economic models that they have, they completely ignore the fact that money exists. And they ignore things like banks and financial markets and how they affect the way we all live. There was one day when I was going through the library, this is the library in my university, looking for some really boring textbook that I didn't want to read. And this words on the spine of a book caught my eye. And the book was called The Grip of Death. And the reason it caught my eye was because nothing that's in the economics section of a library should have a title as interesting as that. I used to work in a bookshop, so it bothers me if something's filed in the wrong place. So I took it out, started to figure out where it should actually be, and the subtitle was even more interesting. It was a study of modern money, debt slavery, and destructive economics. So I ended up scrapping the reading list and just spending the weekend reading through this book. And what it explains is the fundamental thing it was talking about was this question: where does money come from? And it's a question that, although most of us spend most of our lives working for money, we rarely ask questions about where it actually comes from in the first place. So if I ask you now, who makes these? Who makes the coins in your pocket? Any guesses? Bank of England, close. It's the Royal Mint working on behalf of the government. Who makes these? There's a clue on there, it says at the top. Bank of England. What happens if you make your own? Yeah, exactly, something like this, 2 a.m. one morning. But there's a twist in this story. So most people have this idea that only the government is allowed to create money. The twist is that the government only creates the physical money, the coins and the notes. And that kind of physical money makes up only 3% of all the money that exists. So what about the other 97%? Well, firstly, what is that 97%? It's just numbers in computer systems. It's the numbers that you see when you check your bank balance on internet banking, or the number at the end of your bank statement. It has no physical form. It's just an electronic accounting entry in the computer systems of your bank. And who creates these numbers? It's not the Bank of England. It's the same banks that were implicated in the financial crisis. Every time that you take out a loan from a bank, that money isn't coming from somebody's life savings. It's actually new money that is created effectively out of nothing through some very simple accounting. I'm not going to bore you with the accounting today. But usually when we tell people this, if it's the first time they've heard that 97% of the money in the economy is created by banks and not by the government, they usually accuse me of being crazy. So this is a paper from the Bank of England that was released about a year ago. And this is the way they explain the process. They say commercial banks, that's the high street banks, create money in the form of bank deposits by making new loans. When a bank makes a loan, for example, to someone taking out a mortgage to buy a house, it does not typically do so by giving them thousands of pounds worth of banknotes. Instead, it credits their bank account with a bank deposit the size of the mortgage. At that moment, new money is created. So every time somebody borrows, the bank is effectively creating brand new money. This is Martin Wolf, who is the chief economics commentator for the Financial Times. The way he explains it is this. The essence of the contemporary monetary system is the creation of money out of nothing by private banks' often foolish lending. So the effect that this has on the economy and the world we live in depends on how the money that banks create is used. And so this firstly shows you how much money banks have created since 1970. And we've gone from having about 28 billion pounds in the economy 40 years ago to having more than 2,200 billion now. So when we had that economic boom in the run-up to the financial crisis, that wasn't based on anything fundamental. It was effectively driven by the creation of all this new money. And remember that this money has been created when people go into debt, so there is also the creation of huge amounts of debt as well, as much as you can see on this blue line. The green line here is just the amount of money created by the government. So the money created by the banks in the 10 years before the financial crisis here, this is where it went. This is how the money was used. 51% of all the new money that they created went straight into property, into mortgages and commercial property. So if you're wondering why house prices are so expensive, this is a big part of the reason why. 31% went into the financial markets. Only 8% went into non-financial businesses, so businesses outside the financial markets. The idea that most of us grow up with is that banks are there to take money from savers and go and invest it in businesses. But this is actually a really tiny part of what banks do today. And then the remaining 8% was the credit cards that you got on the pre-approved credit card applications that everybody received, this huge bubble of consumer credit and debt that happened before the crisis. So the consequences of this, firstly, there is the debt that is created by this system. Because we all grow up with this idea that money is good and debt is bad, and you want more money and you want less debt. And even after the crisis, the crisis was caused partly because people took on too much debt. So after the crisis, we had people like David Cameron saying we all need to pay down our debts for the sake of the nation. But there's a problem with that. Think about this. What happens when you repay a loan? What happens to the money that you repay the loan with? It disappears. It's exactly the reverse of what happens when a loan is taken out. So this, again, the Bank of England explains this. Just as taking out a new loan creates money, the repayment of bank loans destroys money. Banks making loans and consumers repaying them are the most significant ways in which bank deposits are created and destroyed in the modern economy. So every time you go into debt, new money is created, and when you pay off that debt, the money disappears from the economy. So we can't really say that it's like this, because in the current system, money and debt are the same thing. They're both created simultaneously by the banking system. And money is only created when people go into debt. So when you have, for example, the Citizens Advice Bureau, they do incredible work trying to advise people on how to get out of debt. But the more successful they are in getting people out of debt, the more money disappears from the economy. And we cannot all get out of debt in this system because it drains money from the economy and risks causing a recession. We're kind of dependent on debt. So we have a choice, basically. We either have, if we want more money to come into the economy, we have to go further into debt to the banks. If we say we've just had a crisis that was caused because people had too much debt, therefore we need less debt, the problem is we're going to end up with less money. And the government had a choice here between which of these two options it could choose after the financial crisis. And it went for this option. It's why ever since the crisis happened, you've had people saying, you've had politicians saying, look, we've got to get banks lending again. Even though the problem was banks lending too much, the answer is we need to get banks lending more. So this has meant that since the crisis, the total level of personal debt has hardly fallen. And it's now forecast that by 2018, personal debt in the UK will be as high as it was when the financial crisis hit. So that's dangerous. This guy here is the former boss of the Financial Services Authority, and he was just warning about this. He says, we got into this mess because of excessive creation of private credit and money. We should be concerned if our only escape route implies building up a future excess. So basically, we can't, if too much debt was the problem, then too much debt cannot be the answer. Okay. The next big consequence is on house prices. So a lot of people, particularly in this country, will have heard this story that, there's too many people in the country and there's just not enough houses. Now, it's true that we've not been building as many houses as we need for about the last 20 or 30 years, but this is not the thing that really explains why house prices are so expensive now. This chart here goes from it shows everything relative to 1991. And this purple line, you can't read that, but this purple line is house prices. This green one at the bottom is the population. The red one is the housing stock, the number of houses in the country. So the number of houses in the country has been growing actually faster than the population. The only thing that really explains house prices is this one at the top, which is mortgage lending. And if you remember that every new mortgage loan is creating new money, what this is huge amounts of money flooding into property, pushing up house prices, making houses more expensive, and really requiring people to go further and further into debt. And that's what happened as one of the main drivers of the financial crisis was the house price bubble. And it's also what is happening now in the last sort of couple of years. So for example, this chart here just shows you if you're buying your first home, how much of your salary after tax is going on the mortgage. And you can see here, for the UK as a whole, it's about 30% at the moment for first-time buyers. It doesn't look too bad if you go back across the chart. It's roughly comparable to how it's been in history. But what's different here is that interest rates are at their all-time 300-year low. Once those rates go up, that cost of living for first-time buyers is really going to rise as well. So we've got potentially another housing crisis. A lot of people who've taken on mortgages that they can't afford, and this is really going to cause problems for people. Okay, it has a big impact on inequality. If you think that we're effectively renting all the money we use, and people have to pay interest on all of the debt that is created when this money is created, the result of this across the economy means that the bottom 90% of people are paying interest on net to the top 10%. So it's a continual redistribution of income to the richest. And again, through the housing bubble, when you push up the price of houses, those with the houses become wealthier. Those who are frozen out of the market or can't get the mortgage in the first place because they haven't got the salary end up poorer and poorer and also paying off somebody else's mortgage. Right now, there's about 5,000 families made homeless every year. There are 3.9 million households, which is about 1 in 5, who only have enough savings for 1 month's rent or mortgage. That's a really dangerous situation to be in. You only need to be made unemployed unexpectedly, and within a month in that situation, you're in dire straits. The poorest 10% owe 4 times their household income. If you're in that poorest 10% and you owe 4 years of your income in debt, there's almost no chance that you will ever get out of debt. You'll be in debt until you either die or you declare bankruptcy. Okay, so how can we change it? So the organization that I work for, Positive Money, is campaigning for a reform to the way that banks work, which would fix this way that money is created by the banks. Something similar happened probably about 170 years ago, where in those days, the government only took responsibility for creating coins, and banks were actually able to print paper money. What would happen is you put your coins into the bank, they give you a piece of paper to say you have deposited £5, and then people started to use the paper money instead of the coins because it was easier. It was easier to carry around. It didn't weigh so much. And the banks eventually realized, hang on a minute, if people take these pieces of paper from us and we just write something on there, what happens if we just write anything? You know, if we could actually lend money by just writing out more pieces of paper. And they effectively at that point had the power to create money. They, you know, with that sort of temptation, they overused it. They created too much money, and it caused a property bubble, caused a financial crisis. This was back in the early 1840s. In 1844, the government stepped in and said, well, we're not going to allow the banks to create money anymore because they have too much incentive to abuse that power. And they passed a law, this was the Prime Minister at the day, passed a law in 1844 to say only the government, through the Bank of England, will be allowed to create coins and paper money. Now, obviously, in 1844, you didn't have any kind of electronic debit cards, credit cards, internet banking. There was none of this, and they didn't foresee it. And the way they wrote the law meant that it only applied to physical money. It only applied to coins and paper money, and it never applied to the electronic money that we now use for 97% of all the money in the economy. So what we're saying is that law should be updated, and there's three key things that need to happen. First, you need to take the power to create money away from the banks and return it to some kind of transparent, democratic, accountable body. Now, we know from history you can't trust the banks with the power to create money, but most people would not trust these guys either. Politicians would have, if you give politicians the power to print money, they have the same incentives as the banks to create too much. You know, before every election, you'll see huge amounts being created, paying for white elephants and whatever they think will win votes. So you need to separate two parts of the decision. One is how much money should be created, and that decision needs to be based on what the whole economy needs, not the needs of one particular industry or the banking sector. Second decision is, what is that money going to be used for? And what we're saying is there should be a money creation committee that looks at the whole economy and decides how much money should we create to keep the economy running, to keep people employed, to create jobs. That may be at the Bank of England, but it may be something completely new that's set up. The important thing is it needs to be as transparent and accountable to the public as possible. And then when they create money, it would be transferred to the government. And then, although there's many, many problems with the way democracy works in this country and every other country, at least the government has some kind of mandate to choose how to spend this newly created money. They could get it into the economy either through more government spending, so it could be building affordable houses, it could be any kind of government services that they provide. They could reduce taxes on everybody below a living wage, for example, so if you don't earn more than the living wage, you don't pay any tax. They could even just divide the money up between everybody equally, give everybody an equal share. And that option is usually quite popular when we do a show of hands. Okay, so when they did quantitative easing, the Bank of England created £375 billion of new money, but it pumped it into the financial markets, and it only really resulted in, because it's not easy to read, but it only actually resulted in about £30 billion of additional spending in the real economy. So about £30 billion of additional employment and real value creation. Most of the money stayed in the financial markets, where it pushed up stock prices, benefiting the richest 10%, but doing very little for everybody else. If you allowed the government to create money in the way that we're suggesting, and they get that money into the real economy instead, you would only need £10 billion of new money created to result in the same impact as that $375 billion that they created after the crisis. So it's far more powerful, it creates more jobs, it creates more employment, it gets the economy going again without the impact on making the rich even richer that quantitative easing has had. Okay, the next thing is you need to create this money free of debt. So in the current system, money is only created when people borrow. In the system that we're advocating, money would be created without anybody actually having to go further into debt. And what this means is instead of having this catch-22 situation where you can either have more money and more debt or less debt but less money, you can actually change the dynamics. As the state is creating new money, that money can come into the economy and it can be used to pay off the existing debts that we have. So you could really pay down existing household and personal debt. There would still be a role for banks, but they would actually be middlemen between savers and borrowers. They would no longer have this power to create money, and they wouldn't have so much influence over the economy either. And then the final thing that you need to do is make sure that that new money that is being created goes directly into the real economy. So, you know, when banks have the power to create money, most of the money goes into the housing sector, the financial markets, and on personal loans and credit cards. What we need to make sure happens is that either money goes through investment into businesses or it goes directly into people's pockets so that they can spend it in the real economy. So this is it's seen as quite a radical idea, even though actually the Tories implemented something like this in the 1840s. But it's becoming less and less radical. And this is an article by the chief economics commentator for the Financial Times, where he's now arguing we should strip banks of their power to create money. He refers to the book that we published under Positive Money and the ideas that we have in there, and says this is something we should do before the next crisis. He says, this proposal will bring huge advantages. It will be possible to increase the money supply without encouraging people to borrow to the hilt. It would end too big to fail in banking. It would also transfer seigniorage, which is the benefits from creating money, to the public. So the public would benefit from creating money instead of the banks. Now, so this is really the key question here. If money is power, which it clearly is in today's economy, then who do you want to have that power to create money? Should it be the same banks that have used that power to create essentially a huge financial crisis that has left the public with housing that almost nobody can afford, huge levels of debt, government services being cut in order to rescue the banking sector? I would say these guys clearly can't be trusted with that much power. And what we're arguing for at Positive Money is to take that power back to the public interest, to make sure that money is only created and used in the public interest, and that there's some transparency and democratic accountability over how this power is used. If you want to know more about the technical details, the Positive Money website is full of videos and things you can read that explain more about how this system works and how it could be fixed. We also have local groups around the country. There's about 30 groups at the moment. So you can get involved in there in campaigning for changing this. If you want to sign a petition, sign up on the website. We're going to deliver a petition to the new Prime Minister, whoever that is, saying that this is something they need to address in the next Parliament. And that's it from me. So thank you. Thanks.
Okay, right, thank you very much, Ben. That was excellent. I want to take a couple of questions. My lovely assistant here, Sarah, will be taking your questions, so do raise your hand. I actually have one of my own. The rhetoric coming from the establishment at the moment is all good, you know. It's like the economy's back, guys, growth is back, jobs are back. Is that got anything to do with the 30 billion, like an initial sort of like a burst of light before the gloom, or have they fudged their figures?
It's driven by more money creation by the banks. It's driven by people going into debt. Consumer debt is on the rise now. People are borrowing more on credit cards and personal loans than they have been since before the crisis. Housing debt is going up. So in 2013 alone, the banks created £20 billion of new money just for mortgages. So that is basically £20 billion of new money coming into the property market, not financing building more houses, but pushing up the prices of existing houses. And so the economy, we're still in this situation where we have to drive the economy through going further into debt, and that cannot happen indefinitely. It's unsustainable, and at some point it's going to crash.
So a lot of the new jobs have been created through like lower sort of menial jobs or service sectors and financial systems.
Yeah, things like the 0-hour contracts. Apparently, I'm not sure what it is for the UK, but you only need to be employed for a few hours a week to not be considered unemployed. So you have a lot of people who are officially employed. This talk about having created 1 million jobs since the crisis. There could be 1 million jobs, but people working, one afternoon a week, not enough money to live on. So it's a bit of a statistical illusion.
Right, okay. Can we have a question from the...
Hello there, Ben. Ivor Callop from St Albans. Thank you for your work. It's kept my sanity. In your experience of talking with MPs and sovereign money, do you get a sense of resistance there? And does that resistance come from stupidity and or ignorance? Or is it more about ideology in terms of where they want the power base to lie, i.e. with large corporates and not with individuals and democracy?
Yeah, I think the big problem with MPs is just the lack of understanding. We did a survey last year of members of parliament to ask them if they knew how money was created. And 71% of them said that only the government could create money. So they actually don't understand the way the system works. There's almost no understanding of this, even at sort of quite a senior level. And until you understand that banks create money, you then can't make the connection to things like house prices and personal debt. Until you've made that connection, you're not really ready to talk about why the system needs to change. So one of the big things we have to do is really take a bit of time to help politicians to understand the way the system actually works. And that's quite a slow process, but it's necessary.
So you're saying George Osborne is ignorant and
He's definitely ideological, but I think he's quite ignorant of this issue. I don't think he has an informed position on it.
One more question?
Following on from what you've just been talking about, I watched the parliamentary, very poorly attended debate last year. I think about 16 MPs turned up. Has there been any follow-up, any outcome?
Yeah, well, quite a few of the MPs at that debate argued that we need some kind of official government study into how money is created and how that system can be changed. All of the investigations and all of the commissions that have happened so far have been just focused on banking and how to regulate banks. They've not actually been looking at whether the whole monetary system needs a change. So what we're trying to do now is really push for them to set this commission up. And it's on hold a little bit because of the election. Once we know who's in power, then we'll be able to start trying to work with people to push that forward. Yeah. Thanks.
One more.
Okay.
The last one.
Thanks for coming out. I was just wondering where you think digital currencies might fit in at the moment, because obviously a lot of it is solved by that.
Yeah, I think the bitcoins and the cryptocurrencies are really interesting. I don't think they're going to take over. There's a lot of people saying, this will take over state currencies and national currencies, but for the vast majority of people who've been using a particular currency their entire lives, it's quite difficult to convince people to try something else. There's actually a lot of trust in the national currency despite the problems with it. What I think is interesting is that the Bank of England now, they've set up a new research department which is doing essentially a bit of blue sky thinking. And in that, they've said, what is the relevance to us as a central bank of digital currencies? And actually, should we be issuing a digital currency? What I'm saying is they don't need to issue some kind of Bitcoin pound. They should just be creating money outright anyway, which they've been able to do. They could have done that electronically for the last 30 or 40 years, but they've just given up that responsibility to the banks. So, cool. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, so I'll get I've come unprepared. Can we get the next slides up, please? Thank you. Okay, so our next speaker is Martin Wilkinson. Martin's been a Quaker since his teenage years and is qualified in materials sciences, thermochemistry and teaching. He taught science mostly in British state schools and briefly in Papua New Guinea for about 20 years before working for British Quakers to support local peacemakers in Africa. Although his qualifications are not in social science, he's followed the work of his brother, Richard Wilkinson, co-author of The Spirit Level, for the past 30 years. Since that book was published in 2009, he's been speaking about economic inequality to 40 or 50 groups in Britain, South Africa, and Madagascar. Please welcome Martin Wilkinson.
Well, let me see, I'm not used to a microphone. If you can't hear me, then wave your arms about and I'll try and improve. Because usually I talk to small groups and just use my voice. Anyway, here we are. Fantastic, I mean, really inspiring. I thought some of the things that Dann said, some of his phrases, I would really like to have built them into what I say. And as for being as clear as Ben Dyson, that's a high aim as well. As we're in election time, you may be very bored with elections, but I'd just like to try something out on you, which I don't usually put in. Let's say a political party came along and made promises like that. Said, we have policies which will reduce infant mortality by 1/5, halve the level of obesity, reduce mental illness to 1/3 of the amount of mental illness at the moment, reduce the teenage birth rate to about 1/4, and halve the number of murders. You think they were crazy. But I'm not crazy, and nor are the authors of this kind of work that I'm going to tell you about, and yet that's exactly what they would claim for a long-term policy of creating greater economic equality. I want also to say that before the end of this talk, which I will need a signal to tell me when I'm getting a bit near, maybe you hold up a hand with 5 fingers when I've got 5 minutes. So I really want to get to the bit which connects with things which the Zeitgeist Movement believes is very important, the care of the planet, and I want to show how it connects up with that. Basically to say that the more inequality you have, the more pressure to consume you have, and it's consuming stuff which wrecks the planet. Conversely, the more equality you have, the more ready you are to understand other people, to cooperate, and to do things to rescue the planet from what's ahead of us. Okay, I know about this, as the introduction said, because my brother, Richard Wilkinson, has been working on it for years and years. He and Kate Pickett are epidemiologists. I have to practice saying that, epidemiologist, and it means people who study patterns of disease, but not, in this case, physical reasons for patterns of disease, but social and economic ones. So they've been together working for about 30 person years on this particular subject, and the work they present in that book, which came out 6 years ago now, was not just a description of their work, but of hundreds of research projects by many dozens of different researchers. And I want to talk about it because I think we've got to a turning point in history where the quality of life is not improved by getting economic growth. Whatever the politicians say, they all say growth is what we want. It isn't, but it's improving the social environment in other ways, which I will explain. How good is our society? Well, we look pretty grumpy. That's pretty standard. Things are not good. We have very high levels of mental illness, stress, people dissatisfied, unhappy at work. Did you hear Women's Hour? They had a program this last week about children getting more and more anxious, more and more worried about themselves. So it's going all the way through our society. Now, first I'm going to show you a graph which appears to be very unhelpful to my argument, but it's true. And it says that within a society, the rich do very much better than the poor. So it's showing life expectancy, which varies according to different parts of Britain that you live in, from just over 71 to just over 79, classified by the local neighborhoods or electoral wards that people live in. And you see that the poorest, people who live in the poorest wards live on average to 71, or can expect to, and people in the richest over 79. 8 years difference, probably within a few miles of this building. And interestingly, it isn't only the poorest who suffer. You can see every group suffers in comparison with the one a bit richer than it. So this is a trend which goes all through our society. Now you might think, therefore, that if you compared countries, you would get the same thing. So that the richest countries, people would live longest. Let's have a look. True? Absolutely not true. There is no statistical connection between life expectancy, shown on the vertical axis, and gross national income per head, shown on the horizontal one. None at all. The country where people live longest is Japan, and that's from a long way from being the richest. And countries like Israel, which are among the poorest in terms of money there, and New Zealand and so on, people live much longer than they do, well, not very much, because the differences are quite small. But there is no connection. Now, there are many things which we're more interested in than just living a year or two longer. We're interested in how well our children do at school, how many homicides there are, what's the murder rate, the teenage births, how much imprisonment there is, how much mental illness there is. Those are problems which crop up very often, and they're very important to us. And so Richard and Kate made an index of all of those, and they ranked countries, and then they plotted those, in fact, the index of all of them together against the gross national income per head. And you see, just as with life expectancy, there is no connection. Rich countries do not do better than poor countries. Nor can you say the other way around. There is no connection at all. It's just statistical non-connection. However, if instead of looking at the income in the country, we look at the level of inequality of income, plotted along the bottom, and the same indicator up the sides, we get an extraordinarily close fit, a very strong correlation indeed, showing that that index gets worse as income inequality gets higher. So the more unequal countries, USA above all, but also Portugal and the UK as the most unequal countries in Europe, the index is much worse, and at the other end of the scale, we get the Nordic countries and Japan, very different in other ways from one another, doing very well. And for a social science graph, you know, I studied physical science where points lie on graphs very precisely. But for a social science graph, that's extraordinarily tight fit. Let's have a look at the levels of income inequality in different countries. This is a very simple measure. It's just saying how much richer are the richest 20% compared with the poorest in different countries. And you'll see at one end of the scale, Japan and the Nordic countries, it's about 3.5 times. The other end of the scale, USA, Singapore, and to some extent Britain, it's 7 or 8 times. In other words, we in Britain are twice as unequal as Japan and Finland. We can also look at how it changed over time. Taking from the late 70s up till a few years ago, we see that the really distinctive change happened in between 1979 and 1989 under Thatcher, and when inequality increased very much. Inequality in Britain in the 70s was about the same as it is now in the Nordic countries. And there was a dramatic change, and it was a change that was quite deliberate. I'm not sure that Thatcher said, let's create inequality, but there was a definite change of political ideology and a great many measures, such as weakening the power of unions and lowering high rates of tax on the rich, that produced that effect. It's interesting to look particularly at the top pay, where the changes are even more dramatic. This is in the United States, but the same sort of patterns have happened here. We seem to be led in many ways by the United States, just as during the Reagan-Thatcher era, the two went together. And if we look at how much did the bosses earn, the bosses of the really big companies, compared with their ordinary non-supervisory workers. And we'll see that back in the 1970s, they earned, no, I don't want to use the word earned, I want to say paid. They were paid. Because earned suggests people deserve something, and I don't think that necessarily applies. Okay, all the way through, 1965, 70, 75, 80, about 20 times as much. And now, in the last 10 or 15 years, a variable amount, going up and down a bit with the stock market and so on, but roughly they were paid something like 200 times, going up to 400 times as much. So things have changed dramatically. We tend to accept things as they are, but actually they don't have to be like that. They weren't like that. They weren't like that when I was young. So, you know, things are really different. Just as you have another index of social variables, people's health and happiness and welfare and so on, there's an index produced not by Richard and Kate. Sometimes people say, well, they produced the index and it was carefully chosen to fit their theories. This is one produced by UNICEF, part of the UN, and it says child well-being. In this case, better is at the top and worse is at the bottom. And you'll see that the more unequal countries, measured on a thing called a Gini coefficient, which I can explain, but only if I'm given a moment in private, not too quickly now. Anyway, the more unequal countries do worse. The last time this was measured before that, the UK was bottom. We seem to have moved up a bit, but we're still pretty poor. I need to skip very quickly through a few things, a few of those separate variables that occur on the indicator. So, people in more unequal countries trust each other less. Below 20% in some cases of people say, I on the whole feel I trust other people, whereas in some countries it goes up 60% or so say, yeah, I can trust other people. I'm just about to go to Sweden for the first time, and I'm looking forward to seeing whether it actually feels different. Here's another one. As well as just comparing countries, Richard and Kate have compared the states of the United States and put in the same graph the provinces of Canada. And this is an indication of how many homicides are there per million people. And you'll see that on the left, the more equal states have homicide rates of down as low as 10 per million. And on the right, they go up to 150 per million. 15 times the rate of murders. In the same country, same political system. Imprisonment rates. This is a log graph, and so it's actually more unequal than it seems. Huge differences in the numbers of people in prison, from 40 per 100,000 up to 400 per 100,000. USA leading the way. I feel quite embarrassed because the USA comes out so often. I'm embarrassed when I meet my American friends because there are so many good things about that country, but they think everything is good about that country, and I'm afraid to say they are entirely wrong. Here's another one. You see mental illness. Here we and the USA. This is how many people in the last year have had an incidence of mental illness, and it goes up to about a quarter in our country. That can be just depression, something like that, just depression. Whereas in other countries it can be as low as 10%. 2.5 times the rate of mental illness. If we could track ourselves down that line towards the left by reducing income inequality, that's why I say we might be able to reduce the level of mental illness, the incidence, dramatically in this country. Sometimes people say, well, perhaps these benefits from being in a more equal country come just because there are fewer poor people. It's not only the poor who benefit. Now, to prove that is quite difficult because you have to divide people into class groups in different countries, in this case Sweden and England and Wales, and you have to make sure the class groups are classified in the same way, which is difficult, and everything is measured in the same way. But let's have a quick look at this. This is infant mortality, and we see that the lower the occupational class in Britain, that's the red ones, the higher the infant mortality. And there's a steep slope between correlating with infant mortality and the lower the social class. In Sweden, the blue ones, there are two things to note. One is that there's very little difference between social classes, and the other is that every blue line is shorter than every red line. In other words, in every single social class, including the highest, the Swedes do better. And I could show you the same graph for adult male deaths between 16 and 64. Well, why? What is it that explains how all these different things seem to be affected by fairness? I wish I could show you what you get if you put into your web browser those words, monkey, cucumber, grape. Does anybody know? It's hilarious. It shows monkeys being given cucumbers or grapes according to what they do. And the monkeys object wildly when they get what they think is not the same as the other monkey is getting. So what this suggests to me is that the suggestion of fairness and equality is written right into certainly our culture and possibly our DNA from even before being human. It's well worth a look. And it only occurred to me recently, I heard somebody reciting a bit of the King James Bible when there was a centenary a few years ago, a multi-centenary, and Cain and Abel. Do you remember? It says, it is about respect and violence, which have a very strong connection. Disrespect leads to violence. On the streets of London, you might hear somebody saying, he dissed me, that's why I hit him, or stuck a knife in him. Well, they knew it. However long ago Genesis was written, they knew it then, because it says that Cain, the Lord, it says something like, the Lord did not respect the offerings of Cain, and he did not respect Cain. And then the next verse it says Cain was extremely wroth, and then a couple of verses after that it says he killed his brother. So equality and respect and so on are very important issues to our health and also to our behavior. I'll just remind you about all those different things that go with greater equality is better and greater inequality is worse. Some people think it only matters, that the only serious matter about inequality is if it produces poverty. But actually, inequality brings out much more in our psychology. We have a choice often of how to live together. Are we going to compete? Are we going to cooperate? And the more inequality there is, it seems to bring out these ideas of dominance and subordination, superiority and inferiority. It increases our anxiety about who we are. If there are big differences between us, it matters much more. If you think I'm rubbish and I'm doing a bad job, that's really difficult for me to take. If I feel respected and approved of, then I feel better. And that affects me physically. Issues such as this: do people see me as a success or a failure? Do I feel respected or despised? Do I have, or can I afford, the things that signal success? Now, if we lived in a simple society, in a village, we might know each other by that chap grows the best carrots in the village, and that chap sings tenor wonderfully, and that chap's enormously kind to his neighbours. But that's not how we live. We live in societies where we look at each other and we see from the handbag this person is carrying, or the car that that person's driving, or the status of the job that they have, that's their status. And status matters very much. We might wish it didn't, but it does, and it has an effect on us. People know that health is a matter of psychosocial factors as well as physical factors. So if you have low social status, it actually makes you more likely to be ill, and it makes you more likely, less likely to recover rapidly. And weak social connections, you can actually try sticking cold germs into somebody's nose and see whether they get the cold or not. And you find that people who have more loving connections with family and friends are less likely to get the cold. And you can scratch their hand and see how quickly it heals up, and the ones with more social connections and more loving relationships heal faster. So we are affected. And this goes even to our life before birth. So if a mother is stressed, that has an effect on the baby, and the baby's genes are not changed. You can't change the genes, but you can change how they're expressed. And the baby emerges in a different state from it would have been if the mother wasn't stressed. The things which cause stress most are things where we feel judged. If I asked one of you to do a long division sum and we were just sitting together in a cafe, that probably wouldn't be hard. If I said, do one now in front of everybody here, you might feel, I'm not quite sure about how to do that. If I said, here's a television camera, it's live, it's going out worldwide, that would be really stressful, and that would produce hormones in your body. Now, some people feel stressed like that all the time, and it's very bad for us. A bit of stress is good in short term because it makes you able to talk fast. My wife says I talk very slowly, but I don't, I hope, when I'm here, because there's a bit of stress. And good thing, too. Helps you to run away from the saber-toothed tiger as well. But long-term stress is very bad for you because it diverts the resources of your body away from repairing and building your body and towards the things that you need to deal with a crisis. And some people feel the lower down in society you are, the more likely you are to feel that you're in perpetual crisis. Now, I want to come on to inequality and sustainability. One of the ways we support ourselves when we feel stressed, when we feel worried about our status, is we buy stuff. We've heard about retail therapy. Well, that's exactly it. People buy stuff to show other people that they're successful, to feel strong in themselves, to reward themselves. And the more stuff we buy, the more we wreck the planet, basically. Conversely, if we need to rescue the planet from the direction it's going, not just with climate change due to carbon dioxide and methane, but using up the water supplies of the world and the resources, if we're going to reduce that, we need to cooperate. We need to think of one another. We need to behave differently, make little self-sacrifices. And so those things all happen better in more equal societies. If you're in a very unequal society, it's very difficult to have good and close relations with other people. You go off into your gated community, or you feel ashamed to go into the same place as somebody else. Working hours are much longer in more unequal countries. It's a rather dotty graph because it shows separate years rather than averaging over years. But you'll see that the countries down on the left, like Norway, working hours per year go down to about 1,400. On the right, they go up to about 1,900. Difference, 500 hours a year, 10 hours a week, 2 hours for every working day. Astonishing difference if you think of the liberation that having an extra 2 hours would go. Or you could take 1 hour a day less and have a good holiday, have an extra month holiday. That's what's possible. That's what people are doing now in different countries where it's more equal. And in a place like Britain, which is more unequal, people at all levels of the social scale are likely to work longer. People at the bottom, because they feel they simply must to earn enough to live a decent standard, and people at the top because perhaps if you're working in a big banking firm, maybe it's macho to stay on. You know, you're a wimp if you go home before 9 o'clock in the evening. So more equal societies are more cohesive, have a stronger community life, they recycle more, they go by bike more, they produce less CO2, they want their governments to apply with international agreements, and they give more of their income in aid. How do we get to greater equality of incomes? Well, we could go what I've nicknamed the Swedish solution. We say, it doesn't matter how much people get paid at the beginning, we'll reduce the income differences by having lots of benefits at the bottom and high taxation at the top. Now that works after a fashion. It has two disadvantages. One is that if somebody's being paid 10 million, it's not very easy to reduce him to, say, 200,000. Somebody who's better at the arithmetic than me will work out, but you'd be taxing him at about 95% or something like that. And nobody would probably accept that. The other thing is that if a government comes along and says, okay, we'll produce that, the next government can come along and reverse it, perfectly simply, just by having a Commons majority. Or you can have what I've called the Japanese solution, which is that there are smaller differences in income before tax. Now that may be better if we can get to that, because it does reflect a sense of equality more, and it's less easily reversed. We think that the workplace is the best place to really make a difference, for lots of reasons. The status of our job is very important to us. Somebody's position in society is very largely determined by what job they have. Our power and position at work, people spend a lot of time at work every day, every week, and that's where they experience power differences. Okay. And our income and spending power derive directly from our work. So that's where we need to address it. This is a little graph which I'll show you very quickly. We see the top graph is income difference, and it's highest at the beginning, and then it dropped in the middle years and then went up again, and it's exact reverse of trades union numbers in trades unions. So when trade unions are strong, income differences seem to be different. How could we get there? Some policies. Well, economic democracy would turn companies from being pieces of property into communities, and we think it could reduce pay ratios and transform the experience of work, redistribute wealth, and improve productivity. And these are measured facts about more economically democratic companies. There are lots of them, and quite a lot of different models. And there are some suggestions as to how a government could influence our workplaces to make them more democratic and move towards a more equal society. I think I have to stop.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll just take a couple of questions, but I actually wrote down a couple of things of my own, just as a couple of observations I made during your talk. A few things that people should try to check out when they get time. You mentioned respect and violence, and there's some very good work by a Harvard prison psychologist, James Gilligan, exactly, who's worked with some of the most violent offenders in the prison system in America for 30 years. So if you have a chance, check out the work of James Gilligan. Also, the other sort of shame, respect, and what equality can deliver into what people often say is, well, we're naturally unequal and we're competitive and things. There's a very, likening that to chimp studies, the work of Robert Sapolsky is very worthwhile checking out as well. For just briefly, one example is in a baboon troop that exhibited all the usual competitive tendencies that you'd expect in those type of troops. For years and years and years, I think it was tuberculosis hit that particular troop, and when it did, it killed off the alphas. And the rest of the chimps remaining in that troop decided to be more egalitarian with their behavior from that day on. And any new chimps coming in who tried to exert their dominance were quickly found out how this new troop worked. And it's remained that way for 15 or 20 years. And it's not changing. So, because people say, well, you see it in chimp troops all the time, and that's us, we're just, we're monkeys and stuff. Okay, fair enough, we are, and there's your evidence why that's a very interesting study. I could go on because it raises so many different things. One more, just if I may. Sorry, I know I'm grandstanding, but the Dutch hunger winter. Is everybody familiar with that? Is anybody not familiar with the Dutch hunger winter? Well, it's worthwhile for you then. Okay, the Dutch hunger winter, basically, the Nazis in them exiting Holland in the late stages of the war, basically they took all the food supply away from the Dutch people. Women in their second or third trimester of pregnancy during that time obviously went without food, and so did their babies, who were then born, and chances being, and I think it was about 90 or 95% of all of those babies born grew up to have diabetes, strokes, heart problems, weight issues, because their genes changed to be forever really stingy with their sugars and fats, because they changed in preparation for the coming environment. So what you were saying about effects in utero, because people will pull out things like the twin studies, for example, and they say, these twins look quite similar, but you've got to bring it right back to, you have an environment the minute you have an environment, and that begins in utero. So I think that's an important thing to mention. Apologies for grandstanding there, but it brings up a lot of interesting insights. So could we have some questions, please, from the floor?
Yes. I have actually two questions. I would like you to relate to issues regarding economic, social values, religious and cultural values, regarding first the migrant who come to Europe in terms of reducing inequality here in Europe, but at the same time you have many migrants who like to come here and integrate in Europe. And the same question, would be in regards to how do you think the religious extremists, for example, many times in UK or Germany or Spain, can affect this process that looks very nice on paper and on statistics of reducing inequality when they have other values that might be conflicting with inequality, like religious values, that is very difficult to make in, here, right? You have many, for example, contraception classes in schools and many religious issues conflicted with that one.
Okay, I'll take the second one first. I find that easier, perhaps because I'm a sort of religious person myself. I say sort of because Quakers' religion is to some extent homemade and self-made. And I think that all the main religions grope towards truths. Our first speaker today spoke about fundamental truths in society. And I think that religions have tried to seek that out. And if you look around religions, Christianity is the one I know best, it says that people are fundamentally equal. We are of equal value. And that's the central thing. Now, there may be particular groups where religions have made pronouncements about what they feel about people who have same-sex attractions, something like that. Those seem to me to be extremely important for the individuals concerned, but entirely peripheral to the religion, not the central message of the religion itself. And I think the Archbishop of Canterbury would support that, and perhaps the Pope too, if he allowed himself a little bit of freedom. Question of immigration. Not a thing I've thought about a lot, but I think the more different our society is, the higher the steps there are between one part of society and another, the more unequal it is, the more difficulty people have in fitting into it. So they sometimes talk about some of the effects of the different states, which I showed you, as perhaps being to do with whether there are black or white people, whether a society is united or not. But I think blackness is not of any significance at all, except in as much as it suggests respect. In our particular societies, it's unfortunately become true that there's an association between class and respect and so on with race, which is, to my mind, entirely wrong, but it's there, and so it's difficult for people to fit into a society. But the more equal societies I think, are better at accepting people, whether people from a different class or a different race. And Sweden has taken a great many people of that, a lot of immigrants, many more than we, I think, proportionately. Yes.
It does really highlight the problem of inequality within society.
Yes.
And you see, it's not just money that's the difference, it's everything. Anything that gets people to prejudice, to just not bother thinking anymore about whether they're dealing with an individual, just class them into groups. That's why you've got money. That's why all the state officials have fancy cars and stuff like that. So people don't have to think anymore who it is. Because obviously, someone in a fancy car means there's someone important. And that's the problem people have got. If you continue to just use these really too low-grained ways of dealing with other people in the world, then what you expect? You're going to have a problem because the world life is a lot more fine grained. And obviously, again, the point of the immigrant thing is, you know, I love and respect all our friends that come over here to stay. And also, you know, the ISIS stuff, maybe, yeah, it's about it's inequality.
Sorry, have you got a question? No.
I was just continuing what I was saying.
Okay,
No.
well, I'm right with you that it isn't basically about money. Money is an indicator to ourselves of our status. It's a comforter for our status, and it's an indication of how society values us. And the more equally it is distributed, the less worrying and difficult it is. But I agree, the fundamental thing is about the respect and attitudes we have towards one another, and not how much money we make.
It perpetuates, I think, the other effects. Is that? Yeah, I think you definitely make a sound point. We'll just go to this side of the room. Take a question from over here, please. Try and make it brief because we need to go to lunch then.
What are some small actions that you would recommend to start immediately to break certain habits that sustain inequality, like on an individual level, not policies or rules, but just habits, like personal habits? Like when you're walking down the street and you see somebody who's not got access to a certain good, what kind of habits would you recommend to help with that?
Well, remember what it's all about. It's feelings of respect and disrespect, feelings of being valued or not valued. Now, you can indicate to somebody if you value them. There's a very strong bit I could get you to read from the Spirit Level book, which is about a man in Rotherham coming in to sit down in a social services waiting room, and a very nicely dressed woman comes in, and he feels absolutely terrible. And he describes it, and he starts to swear, and he says he feels he shouldn't be there, and she's thinking that he's crap, and he gets all sweaty, and says he's too fat, and you think, she didn't know that. She didn't know that she was having that effect on him just by how she looked and how he thought she was a different class from him. And perhaps if she'd said hello to him, it would have made a difference. So I think talk to people on the bus, you know, smile at people, connect with people. Also, I think we should avoid spending on things which are ostentatious. If I come into a place and I've got a suit or a handbag or a car which hardly anybody else can afford, I'm saying I'm different from you, I'm superior to you. I think we should avoid that. I think we can also act a bit on the wider social scale by saying which organizations that we could possibly deal with are fostering inequality. I took my money out of Barclays when I heard that the boss of it was being paid 10 million quid a year. And they were corrupt. I mean, Barclays, I've been told today by someone who works for them, of their corruption. And I tried to put it into something that's more mutual. So I tried the nationwide. I then discovered that their boss was paid 1.7 million, and the person in the branch where I enrolled thought that he was paid 70,000. She genuinely did. I had to show her the annual report. So I think we need to know about companies. If you think that the John Lewis model, the partnership, is good, then do your shopping there. If you think that co-ops are more democratic than another kind of company, or a small local shop is more democratic, then do your shopping there. You can use your power. And make sure that you know about this stuff. If you look up Richard Wilkinson TED Talk, you can get 16 minutes, the whole theory of the spirit level book, without reading the whole book. But of course, I encourage you to do that. And I would encourage you also to read a little book that came out, produced by the same authors, Richard Wilkinson and Kate Pickett, called A Convenient Truth. And the convenient truth is, you can get it free online from the Fabian Society, is that the same thing we need to save the planet is more equality. And that's the same thing we need to have a happier society, more equality. And what we don't need is growth. So we could get to a state where we had shorter working hours, more leisure, and know that we were looking after the planet.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Okay, just a couple of notes before we take a break for lunch. There's some flyers on your way out to the right. If at any point during the day, especially at the end, obviously you want to pick those up and spread them around on your travels, please feel free. Also, in case I forget to mention it, there's some sheets to sign up for the movement where you might feel you might wish to be involved in that. That's obviously coming a bit later. As well as hopefully our speakers are going to remain with us for the rest of the day if possible, so that you can have a conversation with them either over lunch or near the end or in the breakout session. So I think we're gonna break for lunch now. If we can arrive back prompt at 5 to 2, we're going to get started. We are running about 20 minutes behind at the moment, but if we come back then, it should be all good. Thanks very much, everyone.